Usually when we talk about spiritual health or assessing our standing before God, we want an X-ray.
Right. We expect a certain mechanical precision with those things.
Exactly. It's like setting a broken arm.
Yeah.
Right. The X-ray shows the jagged white line. You broke rule A, so here's the clinical consequence B. The doctor points to it, puts a cast on it, and, well, it's clean.
Yeah, it's binary, broken or not broken.
Right.
And, as fallen human beings, we actually find that incredibly comforting. We like our morality to be visible, to be neatly categorized, and, most importantly, to be transactional.
Oh, for sure. We want a checklist.
We really do.
But when you step into the world of 8th century biblical prophecy, and specifically the prophetic ministry of the Old Testament God, completely shatters that X-ray machine.
He really does. There is no checklist here.
No, not at all. He doesn't give a clinical, detached diagnosis of the nation's sin. Instead, he gives a raw, bleeding, intensely agonizing picture of, well, a broken marriage.
Yeah, and that shift from a clean, legalistic definition of sin into something deeply emotional and relationally devastating is exactly what we're exploring today.
Yes, it is. So welcome to this deep dive. If you are a first-year MDiv student translating these texts in the library, or, a serious student of the Word, or a ministry peer laboring in the trenches of the local church, you are exactly who we are talking to today.
Absolutely.
Our mission is to provide a rigorous, exegetically deep, and intellectually robust survey of the Book of Hosea.
And we are not just doing a surface-level flyover here. We are drawing from comprehensive Old Testament survey notes, detailed historical briefings from the ancient Near East, and, crucially, we will be interacting directly with the primary source Hebrew text.
The Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartense.
Right, the BHS. We really want to ground everything in the actual linguistic and historical data. We want to show how this ancient book provides an irreplaceable vantage point for understanding the heart of Yahweh.
The ultimate goal here is to inspire a deeper love for God's redemptive plan and to equip you for effective, biblically grounded local church ministry.
Which is so needed.
It really is. So let's set the scene. I want to paint a vivid picture that sits in Laban, the setting in life.
Yeah, take us there.
Okay, it's roughly 740 BC. You are standing in the bustling ancient streets of Samaria, which was the fortified capital of the northern kingdom of Israel.
Right.
And on paper, if you just look at the economic ledgers, this is an absolute golden age. King Jeroboam II has been on the throne, or his reign has just recently concluded, and wealth is booming in a way they really haven't seen since Solomon.
There's a massive economic peak.
Huge. The borders have expanded all the way up to Hamath. National's coffers are overflowing. You have an elite upper class building summer houses and winter houses adorned with inlaid ivory.
Yeah, from a purely materialistic standpoint, it is the absolute peak of the Northern Kingdom's power. But, it's a terrifying illusion.
Why do you say that?
Because if you look underneath the floorboards of this society, the nation is rotting from the inside out. You have rampant, bloody political assassinations in the palace.
Wow, yeah.
You have complete moral and judicial collapse in the courts. The poor are being sold for a pair of sandals, literally. And worst of all, at the foundational level, you have this insidious spiritual syncretism.
Where they are blending religions.
Exactly. The worship of Yahweh is being seamlessly, almost unconsciously, blended with the fertility cults of Canaan.
Right. So the average Israelite at this time probably thought they were doing great spiritually.
Oh, they definitely did.
They were going to the altars at Bethel. They were offering the required sacrifices. But they had entirely detached their economic prosperity from their covenantal obligations to Yahweh.
They assumed their booming economy was proof of divine favor.
Yeah.
Or, honestly worse, they assumed it was proof that the local Canaanite fertility gods were actually doing the heavy lifting for their harvest.
While ignoring everything else.
Right, while they simultaneously ignored the absolute decay of justice, mercy, and truth in their own streets. It's a society high on its own supply, completely blind to the geopolitical tsunami that is forming on the horizon in Mesopotamia.
The Assyrians.
Yeah, good.
And into this volatile, self-deceived, hyper-wealthy society, God doesn't just give a prophet a sermon outline to preach in the town square.
No, that would be too easy.
Right. He doesn't just hand him a scroll of indictments. He gives a scandalous, heartbreaking, life-altering command.
Yeah, it's shocking.
He tells Hosea in chapter 1, verse 2, "Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredoms and have children of whoredoms, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking Yahweh."
It is a command that utterly shatters the prophet's personal life in order to make a public theological point.
So to understand why a holy God uses such a visceral, offensive metaphor, we first have to ground ourselves in the gritty historical and linguistic reality of this 8th century BC Northern Kingdom.
We really need to look at the timeline.
Right, let's start there. From a conservative evangelical baseline, we affirm the traditional authorship here. This is the work of Hosea, the son of Beeri.
Yeah.
But what immediately stands out when you open the book is the sheer duration and the peculiar framing of his prophetic ministry in the superscription.
Yeah, the superscription in Hosea 1.1 anchors his ministry in a massive 40-year window. We are talking roughly 760 BC down to the catastrophic fall of Samaria in 722 BC.
It's a long time.
4 decades of preaching an incredibly unpopular, agonizing message. But, the superscription is fascinating for another reason.
What's that?
The text specifically notes he prophesied during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah.
Right, but those are all kings of the southern kingdom of Judah.
Exactly. He only lists one king from his own northern kingdom, which is Jeroboam II.
Okay, let's unpack this because I have to push on this. If I'm an MDiv student studying the historical books alongside the prophets, the math just doesn't add up.
It really doesn't.
Hosea is a northern prophet. He is living in Israel. He is preaching almost exclusively to the northern kingdom, which, he frequently refers to as Ephraim.
Right.
Yet he lists 4 Judean kings and ignores the last 30 years of his own nation's monarchs. I mean, after Jeroboam II, there were 6 more kings in the north before the nation fell to Assyria.
Zechariah, Shallum, Menahem, Pekahiah, Pekah, and Hoshea.
Yeah, those guys. Why on earth does Hosea completely ignore the very kings who were ruling the nation he was actively prophesying to?
Well, because it is a profound theological statement disguised as a historical superscription.
Oh, interesting.
By omitting those final 6 northern kings, Hosea is essentially declaring their reigns covenantally illegitimate. You have to understand the geopolitical pressure cooker that occurred after Jeroboam II died.
It was chaos.
Absolute political anarchy. It is a bloodbath. Zechariah reigns for 6 months before Shallum assassinates him.
Wow.
Then Shallum reigns for 1 single month before Menahem assassinates him. Dynasties are literally lasting weeks.
It's basically mob rule disguised as a monarchy.
Exactly. Hosea is looking at this rapid, bloody succession of assassins and usurpers, and he is saying, these are not covenantal kings, these are warlords.
So he just writes that on the record.
He refuses to legitimize them by recording their names in the sacred text alongside the Davidic line. He lists the Davidic kings of Judah because, theologically, he views the Judean Davidic line as the only valid, divinely authorized monarchy in the eyes of Yahweh.
That makes total sense.
It's his subtle opening volley, declaring that the North's entire political structure is fundamentally invalid and destined for collapse.
And that makes the historical context so much richer. And that political anarchy wasn't happening in a vacuum either. It's not just internal assassinations, it's international panic.
Oh, absolutely.
During this exact window, we have the Syro-Ephraimitic War happening in the 730s BC. For those listening who might not be familiar with that conflict, this is when Ephraim, the northern kingdom of Israel, allies with Syria, and they try to militarily force the southern kingdom of Judah into a coalition.
Right, against the rising superpower of the day, which was the Neo-Assyrian Empire.
And the Assyrians were terrifying.
The Assyrians, led by Tiglath-Pileser III, were the absolute masters of terror in the ancient world. They weren't just a conquering army. I mean, they utilized psychological warfare, mass deportations, and horrific public executions to subjugate nations.
So the northern kings were panicking.
Vacillating wildly in sheer desperation. One moment, a king like Menahem is paying 1,000 talents of silver in tribute to Assyria just to keep his throne.
Right.
The next moment, an anti-Assyrian faction assassinates the king and tries to rebel.
And the culmination of this disastrous foreign policy happens with the last king, Hoshea.
Right. Hoshea assassinates Pekah in 732 BC to claim the throne. Initially, Hoshea plays the role of a compliant, submissive Assyrian vassal.
But then he changes his mind.
Yeah, as the historical data shows, he decides to play a very dangerous game of economic diplomacy. He decides to withhold his annual tribute from Assyria and secretly shifts his allegiance to Egypt, sending messengers to King So of Egypt.
And the detail here regarding the ancient Near Eastern economy is just crucial. He sends a massive quantity of olive oil as tribute to Egypt.
Right, which was incredibly valuable.
Exactly, because olives didn't grow well in the Egyptian climate. It was a highly lucrative luxury commodity. Hosea literally thinks he can buy an Egyptian military alliance with this olive oil to protect him from the Assyrian war machine.
It was diplomatic suicide. Assyria had an incredible intelligence network. They find out about the treason. And as we know, Assyria is not a nation you double-cross.
Definitely not.
Shalmaneser marches his army down, arrests King Hoshea, and lays siege to Samaria. It is a brutal, agonizing 3-year siege. People are starving in the streets.
Unimaginable suffering.
Finally, in 722 or 721 BC, Shalmaneser's successor, Sargon II, breaches the walls. The city is utterly destroyed. Tens of thousands of Israelites are deported and scattered across the Assyrian Empire, which leads to the historical concept of the 10 lost tribes.
It is the ultimate covenantal catastrophe, the complete annihilation of the northern kingdom.
Yep.
So that is the terrifying bloody powder keg that Hosea is living in. And right in the middle of this national trauma, we have the historical crux of the entire book, his marriage to Gomer.
Right.
Now, I know there have been centuries of scholarly debate over this. You read commentaries, and some scholars insist this must be an allegory, like a visionary dream.
Yeah, that's a common critical view.
Where does the conservative evangelical scholarship land on this, and why does it matter so much?
Well, we firmly defend the literal historical reality of this marriage. Treating it merely as an allegory, a parable, or a visionary trance completely flattens the emotional gravity of the entire book.
It takes the sting out of it.
It neuters the text, honestly. Hosea was commanded by God to actually marry a real historical woman named Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, who would prove to be chronically, devastatingly unfaithful to him.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because if I am preaching this on a Sunday morning, someone in the congregation is going to come up to me afterward and say, wait, isn't it contrary to the holiness of God to command his prophet to do this?
It's a fair question.
We are talking about a perfectly holy God commanding a man to marry a woman explicitly described as a wife of whoredoms. How do we reconcile this with the Levitical laws regarding purity, especially for those representing God? It feels scandalous.
It is absolutely supposed to feel scandalous. If we read it and don't feel a sense of shock, we aren't reading it right.
Okay, explain that.
In the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament, we have this vital concept of the prophetic sign act. Prophets didn't just speak the word of God, they were required to embody it.
Like Ezekiel.
Exactly. Think of Ezekiel being commanded to lie on his side for over a year, or Isaiah walking stripped and barefoot for 3 years. God uses the prophet's physical life as a billboard.
Right.
The severity of Israel's covenantal breach was so extreme, so offensive to the holiness of God, that a mere verbal sermon would no longer suffice.
Because words had lost their meaning to a deaf nation.
Exactly right. God needed a physical, breathing canvas to display his genuine, agonizing grief over Israel's spiritual adultery.
Which the Hebrew text calls stranim.
Yes, Shinam. God is essentially saying, you want to know how you are treating me, watch my prophet. Hosea had to experience the raw, visceral, humiliating heartbreak of human betrayal so he could authentically preach the divine heartbreak of covenantal betrayal.
Wow. So the historical chaos of the Assyrian threat wasn't just a backdrop, and his ruined marriage wasn't just a side story to make him empathetic.
No, not at all.
His life and his words were forged together into this terrifying, formal, legal document against the nation. And that actually brings us to the literary and rhetorical structure of the book.
It's a seamless transition.
To understand how Hosea actually wrote this down, we have to grasp the primary literary genre he is employing, which is the rib. Let's unpack that for our students.
Yeah, the rib is the Hebrew term for a formal covenant lawsuit. This is a critical framework for understanding all the prophets, really.
It changes how you read them.
It does. God is not depicted in Hosea as an unpredictable, capricious, ancient Near Eastern deity just throwing a cosmic tantrum because he didn't get his sacrifices on time. He is stepping into the courtroom as the aggrieved prosecutor and the sovereign judge. He is filing a formal, meticulously argued legal claim based on the explicit stipulations of the Mosaic covenant.
Specifically, the blessings and curses outlined in Deuteronomy 28 through 32.
Exactly. Israel signed a legally binding contract at Mount Sinai, and God is bringing them to court for egregious breach of contract.
And the macro structure of the book brilliantly reflects this intense legal and emotional process. It's split into two main sections.
Right.
Chapters 1 through 3 give us these raw, biographical narrative syntax. It's the story of the marriage to Gomer, the birth of the children, her infidelity, and Hosea buying her back.
But then chapters 4 through 14 shift gears completely.
Yeah, the narrative structure drops away, and you are hit with this volatile, densely compressed, fiery Hebrew poetry. It's like moving from a tragic memoir directly into the prosecutor's closing arguments in a capital trial.
And even within that opening narrative in chapters 1 through 3, the rib, the lawsuit, is actively being established through the naming of Hosea's children.
They are central to the case.
These aren't just unfortunate family names. They are living, breathing indictments walking around the streets of Samaria.
Let's look closely at those names because the Hebrew wordplay here is devastating. The first son is Jezreel.
Right.
Now, if you just translate it, Jezreel geographically means God sows, which sounds like a beautiful agricultural blessing, especially for an agrarian society.
It sounds incredibly positive.
But historically, Jezreel was the specific valley where King Jehu executed a bloody, ruthless massacre of Ahab's house, which is recorded in 2 Kings 9 and 10.
Yes, a very dark history.
By naming his firstborn kid Jezreel, Hosea is walking around the capital reminding the royal elite that God has not forgotten the blood guilt of Jehu's dynasty. The current king, Jeroboam II, is the great-grandson of Jehu.
Right.
Hosea is telling the king, judgment is coming to the very valley where your dynasty was founded in blood.
Then comes a second child, a daughter named Lo-Ruhamah. The name literally translates to no mercy or not pitied.
That is heavy.
We have to understand this not just as a sad name, but within the ancient Near Eastern context of honor and shame culture. In a deeply patriarchal society, a father's pity, his compassion, was the fundamental source of a daughter's protection, provision, and social standing.
So it's a social death sentence.
To publicly name a daughter not pitied was to declare her socially orphaned and exposed. It signified a terrifying theological reality for the nation. The withdrawal of divine compassion, the protective hedge over the northern kingdom was being formally removed.
God is saying, I'm done protecting you.
The Assyrian wolves were circling, and God was saying, I will no longer pity you, I will not protect you.
And then comes the devastating final blow. The third child, a son named Lo-Ammi, not my people.
That is the formal divorce decree.
Wow.
If you go all the way back to the formation of the nation at Sinai, God's foundational covenantal formula was, I will be your God and you will be my people. Lo-Ammi is the legal dissolution of that covenant. It is God standing in the courtroom and saying, the contract is void. You have committed spiritual adultery for the last time. You are no longer mine and I am no longer yours.
If the book ended there, it would be the most depressing text in the canon.
Unbearably dark.
But the rhetorical brilliance of Hosea is that he doesn't leave the listener in the ash heap. He uses a literary device called chiastic reversal.
Yeah, this is so good.
He takes these exact names of absolute judgment, and almost in the same breath, in chapter 2, he flips them into visual and oral models of grace.
Yes.
He promises an eschatological day when Lo-Ammi, not my people, will be called children of the living God. He says he will have pity on Lo-Ruhamah. He turns the curse backward upon itself.
It is a stunning display of sovereign grace. But before we get to the ultimate restoration, we have to wade through the poetry of the prosecution.
You have to get through the lawsuit first.
Right. In chapters 4 through 14, Hosea employs incredibly volatile metaphors. He uses what scholars sometimes call prophets' parables. He rips analogies right out of everyday agrarian and domestic life, and he womanizes them as satire to expose the absurdity of Israel's sin.
These metaphors are so biting, and honestly, if you are preaching this, they preach incredibly well. Take the half-baked loaf in chapter 7, verse 8.
Oh, that's a classic one.
Hosea says, Ephraim mixes himself with the peoples. Ephraim is a cake not turned. Think of a flatbread baking on a hand griddle. You leave it on one side too long.
It burns.
The bottom is scorched, black, burned to a crisp by the heat of the fire. But the top is completely doughy, raw, and inedible. Hosea is using this to describe their geopolitical and spiritual syncretism.
It perfectly captures their muddled, inconsistent foreign policy. They're consumed by hidden passions, hot as an oven for political intrigue, constantly assassinating their rulers and making frantic treaties with Egypt and Assyria.
That's the burnt side.
Exactly. But toward Yahweh, they're completely raw, unformed, and useless. They're unpalatable to God and completely ineffective in the international arena they are so desperately trying to impress.
For those of you pastoring today, especially in contexts where there is immense pressure to compromise, this half-baked loaf metaphor hits uncomfortably close to home.
It really does.
When we try to straddle the line, maintaining a veneer of Orthodox faith while desperately seeking security in the approval of the culture or in our financial portfolios or in political power. The result isn't a balanced, nuanced integration.
No, it's a half-baked loaf.
Exactly. You end up being entirely unpalatable to a holy God, and ironically, you are still useless to the secular world you're trying so hard to appease. You're burnt on one side and raw on the other.
That is precisely the covenantal syncretism Hosea is attacking. And he continues with the zoological and military metaphors.
Like the dove.
Yes. He calls Israel a gullible dove in chapter 7, verse 11, a senseless, brainless bird fluttering frantically back and forth between Egypt and Assyria, completely oblivious to the fowler's net that is about to snap shut on them.
And he also uses the metaphor of a faulty bow or a treacherous bow. I want to dig into that because a modern reader just thinks of a stick with a string.
Right, like a toy.
But in ancient warfare, a faulty bow meant certain death.
Absolutely. The Hebrew likely refers to a composite bow, which was the pinnacle of ancient military technology. They were made of meticulously laminated layers of wood, animal horn, and sinew.
Very complex engineering for the time.
Incredible penetrating power, but the glue and materials were highly sensitive to weather, humidity, and lack of maintenance. If an archer didn't maintain it perfectly, the bow would warp.
It becomes useless.
It would go slack, or worse, snap backward when drawn. In the heat of battle, when the enemy is charging and you need it most, it fails completely.
So God is applying that to Israel.
Right. God is looking at Israel and saying, you are a faulty weapon. I formed you to be a display of my glory to the nations. But in the moment of covenantal testing, you go slack, you warp, you are utterly unreliable.
The rhetoric just cuts right to the bone.
No.
And he doesn't just use metaphors. He uses brilliant, satirical Hebrew wordplay.
Yes, the Hebrew text is full of this.
When you look closely at the text, Hosea employs a technique called geziah. He takes the sacred foundational city of Bethel, which literally translates to house of God.
A very holy site.
This is where Jacob sought the ladder to heaven. It is a site of immense patriarchal heritage. But because Jeroboam I had set up a golden calf idol there centuries earlier, and it had become the epicenter of state-sponsored idolatry, Hosea refuses to call their sanctuary by its proper name.
He renames it.
He renames it Beth-Aven, which means house of wickedness or house of nothingness.
He is mocking their liturgy. He is saying, you think you are going up to the house of God. You are going up to the house of nothingness. Your sacrifices are a black hole.
He also targets their economic corruption with a brilliant linguistic pun in chapter 12. In Hebrew, the word for merchant is Kenan, which is linguistically identical to Kenan.
Oh, that's clever.
So when Hosea talks about the merchants in Ephraim using dishonest scales to oppress the poor and hoard wealth, he's saying, by your unjust economics, you Israelites have literally become the Canaanites you were commanded to drive out of the land.
Wow.
You haven't just adopted their religion, you've adopted the exact immoral, predatory economic practices of the pagans.
But Hosea isn't just making these accusations out of thin air. To prove this covenant lawsuit, he actually uses Israel's own sacred history as the ultimate weapon against them.
Yeah, turning their history against them.
This is a masterclass in what we call interbiblical exegesis. He tells the story behind the story, systematically co-opting earlier biblical traditions to formulate his critique.
This is so important for understanding how the Old Testament canon holds together. Let's look at how he weaponizes the book of Judges. Hosea repeatedly brings up the days of Gibeah. Now, if you are a student of the Word, you know that Judges 19 through 21 details the horrific events at Gibeah.
Very dark chapters.
It is arguably the absolute lowest, most depraved moral point in Israel's pre-monarchic history.
It involves the horrific abuse and murder of a Levite's concubine, followed by a retaliatory civil war that resulted in the near extinction of the tribe of Benjamin.
It was a disaster.
It is a narrative of absolute moral anarchy, summarized by the phrase, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes."
And Hosea points to the supposedly civilized, highly structured, prosperous political state of his day under Jeroboam II and says, you haven't evolved. You're acting just like the men of Gibeah.
Right.
He equates the entire northern geopolitical apparatus with all its wealth and military might with the absolute nadir of their historical depravity. He's saying, underneath your fine clothes and ivory beds, you are the rapists and murderers of Gibeah.
He does the same thing with the patriarchs. In chapter 12, he brings up their namesake, Jacob. He highlights Jacob taking his brother by the heel in the womb.
emphasizing his deceit.
He highlights Jacob's deceit, his manipulation, his self-sufficient arrogance characteristics that perfectly mirrored the corrupt, self-reliant mercantile practices of Ephraim in Hosea's day.
They probably loved claiming Jacob as their father.
They love to claim Jacob as their father to justify their chosen status. Hosea says, yes, you are exactly like Jacob, you are deceivers. But then, Hosea pivots brilliantly.
Right, he doesn't just use Jacob for condemnation. He notes that Jacob eventually met his match. Jacob wrestled with the angel of God, he wept, and he sought God's favor at Bethel.
It establishes a historical, theological precedent. Hosea is telling the nation, you eagerly share your ancestors' deceit, but if you want to survive, you must also share his repentance.
That's powerful.
If the father of the 12 tribes, the man who gave you your name, only escaped his pattern of sin and death through weeping brokenness and total divine submission, what makes you think you can escape the Assyrian army through clever military treaties and olive oil shipments?
You can't bribe your way out of this.
You must return to Bethel, not to offer vain sacrifices, but to weep.
I love how he recontextualizes the Valley of Achor, too. Back in Joshua 7, after the victory at Jericho, Achan steals the devoted things.
The sin in the camp?
His hidden sin causes Israel to be defeated at Ai. He's exposed, and he and his family are stoned in the Valley of Achor, which literally translates to the Valley of Trouble.
It was a site of ultimate curse, divine wrath, and national failure.
And yet, in Hosea 2.15, God says he is going to take that exact valley, that site of their deepest historical shame and execution, and turn it into a petah tikwa, a door of hope.
That is beautiful.
Only a sovereign God can take the geography of our deepest failure and transform it into the gateway of restoration.
And this brings us to another crucial layer of Hosea's rhetoric. He is not just interacting with his own biblical history, he is engaged in aggressive theological polemical warfare against the surrounding ancient Near Eastern culture.
He is going after their worldview.
He is systematically demythologizing the Canaanite worldview, specifically the Baal cycle.
We need to explain how this Baal myth actually worked in the ancient mind, because the average Israelite farmer in Samaria was thoroughly confused.
They really were.
They looked at the agricultural bounty of Jeroboam II's reign, the massive harvests of grain, the new wine, the oil, and they literally credited it to Baal. Baal was the Canaanite storm god, the rider of the clouds.
According to the Ugaritic texts we have discovered, the myth went like this. Every year, Baal would battle Mot, the god of death and the underworld.
Okay.
Mot would swallow Baal, causing the dry, dead summer season. Then Anat, Baal's sister consort, would defeat Mot, and Baal would be resurrected.
And that resurrection was tied to the rain.
Yes, this resurrection, culminating in his sexual union with Anat, or the heifers of the field, was believed to bring the autumn rains, fertilizing the soil. The Israelites had bought into this transactional, mythological view of agriculture.
And God issues the ultimate crushing correction in chapter 2, verse 8. He says, "She did not know that I gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal."
He claims it all.
Yahweh asserts absolute, unshared sovereignty over creation. He strips the magic, the sex, and the myth out of the weather. Material provision is not the result of a cyclical, transactional ritual with a localized fertility deity.
No, it is a gracious gift from a personal, historical husband who rules the cosmos.
And in doing so, Hosea completely subverts their concept of the Hyos Gamos, the sacred marriage or sacred prostitution that took place at the high places.
Right. The Israelites thought they could manipulate the gods.
Essentially turning the divine realm into an agricultural vending machine through cultic sexual acts.
And Hosea says no. The covenant with Yahweh isn't a magic ritual to manipulate the weather. It is a legally binding covenant, a brit rooted in righteousness, justice, and steadfast love. You cannot buy God off.
And because they so flagrantly violated that covenant, Hosea introduces an image of God that was totally countercultural and frankly terrifying.
Very terrifying.
In the ancient world, deities were often pictured as static, predictable protectors. Maybe a majestic guardian deity at the temple gate.
But Hosea turns God into a predator.
He uses volatile zoological metaphors in chapter 13. Because of their unrepentant sin, God says he will become to them like a tearing lion, a shoal, and a lurking leopard, a namer.
He says he will fall upon them like a bear robbed of her cubs and tear open their breasts.
It is Violent, shocking imagery.
It really is.
I have to stop you there, because if I'm preaching this, I know exactly how a modern congregation will react.
Oh, they will push back.
We live in a culture that only wants to hear about God as a gentle shepherd, a cosmic therapist, or, a harmless grandfather figure. How do we, as pastors, present a God who describes himself as a lurking leopard waiting to tear his own people to pieces? Why is this terrifying predator imagery necessary for the church today?
It is absolutely necessary because it shatters our arrogant attempts to domesticate God.
Say more about that.
The Israelites thought they could manage Yahweh. They thought they could put him in a theological box, appease him with a few half-hearted sacrifices at Bethel on the Sabbath, and then go run their corrupt businesses, exploit the poor, and sleep with temple prostitutes the rest of the week.
They thought they had him figured out.
The predator imagery proves that the sovereign God of Israel is utterly unmanageable. He will not be a passive accessory to our sin.
Right.
If we, as his covenant people, align ourselves with the forces of destruction, injustice, and idolatry, we place ourselves directly in the crosshairs of his holy justice. Preaching this reminds the church that God's holiness is not a warm blanket, it is a consuming fire.
That is a crucial pastoral word. We cannot afford to preach a declawed line of Judah.
No, we cannot.
And this fierce, predatory imagery leads us directly into the core theological tension of the entire book. We're looking at the intersection of covenantal and biblical theology here, and it all boils down to the agonizing collision of God's unyielding holy justice with his irrepressible, electing fatherly love.
The entire book pivots on the conflict between two fundamental Hebrew concepts, gizd and snunim.
Let's define those.
Gizd is a rich term. It means covenant faithfulness, steadfast love, loyal devotion. Zununim, as we mentioned, is spiritual whoredom, chronic, willful unfaithfulness.
Hosea contrasts them sharply.
Mm-hmm.
He says in chapter 6, verse 4, "What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? Your love, your ease, is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes early away."
Israel's loyalty is superficial.
It evaporates the moment the sun comes up and the Assyrian heat is applied. But God's ease is an eternal, legally binding, and deeply emotional oath.
And the tragedy is that the leadership of Israel completely failed to teach this reality.
Yes, the text hammers again and again on the concept of dada chojim, the knowledge of God. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge.
And Hosea places the blame squarely on the institutional priesthood.
They completely failed their mandate. They rejected the true experiential, ethical, and relational knowledge of God. Instead, they just propped up this external hypocritical liturgy.
They were happy to collect the sin offerings. In fact, they fed on the sin of the people because more sin meant more meat at the altar, but they didn't care that there was no truth, no mercy, no dada chomas in the land.
Because the priests lacked that experiential knowledge, they completely failed to understand the divine heart. And this brings us to what might be the most profound ontological revelation in the entire Old Testament, which is the macro-structural pivot of Hosea 11.
Hosea 11 is simply breathtaking.
If you are reading this book straight through, the rhetoric of the lawsuit has been building and building. God is the prosecuting attorney, and he has proven his case beyond a shadow of a doubt. The evidence is overwhelming.
The punishment, according to Deuteronomy, is supposed to be total destruction and exile.
But then right at the climax of the trial, God speaks not as a detached judge, but as a heartbroken father.
He remembers teaching Ephraim to walk.
He says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him. I took them up by their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love."
When you read the Hebrew syntax here, you see an internal legal and emotional crisis within the Godhead. The rib, the lawsuit, demands that Ephraim be treated like Admah and Zeboim.
Remind us what those cities are?
According to Deuteronomy 29, Admah and Zeboim were cities of the plain that were completely annihilated alongside Sodom and Gomorrah. Total fiery destruction.
So justice demands fire from heaven upon Samaria.
But then the emotional arc of God's electing love overtakes the legal demand. God cries out in verse 8, "How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my burning anger."
I look at this and I see such a profound reality about the nature of who God is. He is not an unfeeling, detached cosmic architect. He's not a distant clockmaker who just rounded up the universe, handed down some rules, and walked away.
No, he is deeply personally wounded by our sin.
Think about it. When we treat sin as merely a broken rule or a technical legal infraction, we completely miss the relational gravity that Hosea is revealing. Sin is not just breaking a speed limit. It is a knife in the heart of a faithful husband.
It is a rebellious child violently slapping the face of the father who tenderly taught them to walk.
And that immense relational gravity creates a massive, almost insurmountable theological problem within the text of the Old Testament.
Right. How does this get resolved?
If God is perfectly just, he cannot simply wave away the rib. He is a holy judge. He can't just ignore the lawsuit and say, let's let bygones be bygones.
The curses of the Deuteronomic law must be executed. Blood must be shed for sin.
So how does God satisfy his perfect, unyielding justice while simultaneously saving his adulterous, guilty bride? How does the roaring, tearing lion become the healing dew that restores the nation?
Hosea leaves us with the structural void that the Old Testament itself cannot fully answer.
And this brings us to the Christological focus of our deep dive, the promised seed. We have to look at how this ancient book points relentlessly forward to the person and work of Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Let's trace this messianic trajectory, starting with that very verse in Hosea 11:1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son.
If you've read the Gospel of Matthew, you know Matthew explicitly quotes this exact verse in chapter 2, applying it directly to Jesus when Joseph and Mary flee to Egypt to escape Herod and then return.
Now, I know a lot of MDiv students read Matthew 2, they flip back to Hosea 11, and they think, wait a minute, Matthew is taking this way out of context.
Right. In Hosea, the context is clearly looking backward at the historical nation of Israel in the Exodus. Israel is the son. Hosea is not making a predictive prophecy about a baby hiding in Egypt.
So how did a first-century Jewish mind actually validate that connection? Does Matthew just have terrible exegesis?
It looks like arbitrary proof texting to a modern Western reader who expects prophecy to be purely predictive, like a crystal ball. But if you don't understand the hermeneutic of corporate typology, you miss the genius of what the Holy Spirit is doing through Matthew.
Explain that corporate typology.
In the Old Testament, Israel was designated as the corporate firstborn son of God. But as Hosea just proved, Israel failed. They grumbled in the wilderness, they built golden calves, they committed spiritual whoredom, they were a disobedient son.
So God's redemptive plan required a true, ultimate, individual son who would recapitulate, relive, and perfectly succeed at Israel's history.
He has to redo the test.
Exactly. Jesus willingly goes down into Egypt, comes out, and perfectly outlives Israel's history. Where the corporate son, Israel, failed the wilderness test for 40 years, Jesus, the true son, passes the wilderness temptation for 40 days.
He doesn't grumble, he quotes Deuteronomy.
He is the unblemished son who secures the true spiritual exodus that the nation never could. Matthew isn't taking Hosea out of context. He is showing that Jesus is the fulfillment of the pattern Hosea established.
That is corporate typology at its finest. And we see another direct, explicit messianic trajectory in Hosea 3:4-5.
Oh, yes.
The text says that for many days, Israel will abide without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar. This predicts the long, dark period of exile. But afterward, the text says, the children of Israel shall return and seek Yahweh their God and David their king, and they shall come in fear to Yahweh and to his goodness in the latter days.
Now, Hosea is writing hundreds of years after the historical king David died. He's talking about the eschatological restitution of the Davidic monarchy.
Jesus Christ is this idealized, eschatological Davidic monarch. He is the ultimate king they are returning to, the one who establishes a kingdom that will never be destroyed.
Furthermore, consider the prophecy in Hosea 1.10 and 2.1. After predicting the fracture and exile of the people, Hosea predicts a future gathering of Judah and Israel. He says they will be gathered together and they will appoint for themselves one head. In Hebrew, Shrei.
Yes, and the Apostle Paul, under divine inspiration, reaches back and grabs this exact passage in Romans 9.25-6.
Paul uses it to explain a mystery that would have shocked an 8th century Israelite, the inclusion of not just scattered Jews, but pagan Gentiles into the family of God.
Through Christ, who is the true one head, God looks at those who are historically and covenantally Lo-Ami Gentiles who are literally not his people, and by grace declares them sons of the living God. Christ unites the fractured cosmos under his headship.
And he accomplishes this ultimate reunification by defeating our greatest, most ancient enemy.
Hosea 13.14 has this incredible, almost taunting declaration from Yahweh. I will ransom them from the power of Sheol. I will redeem them from death. O death, where are your plagues? O Sheol, where is your sting?
In the ancient Near East, Sheol, the dark underworld, was the ultimate dread. It was the final, unbeatable, consuming reality for all mortals. But Hosea envisions God marching down and challenging death itself to a duel.
And this becomes the exact rhetorical ammunition Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 15.55 to celebrate the historical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Paul writes, "The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. The power of sin is the rib, the lawsuit. But Christ exhausts the lawsuit."
That is the ultimate resolution to the theological tension we raised earlier. How does God remain just while saving the adulterous bride?
Christ steps into the courtroom of the divine rib.
He stands in the place of Gomer. He stands in the place of Israel. He stands in our place. On the cross, Jesus takes the title, Lo ami, not my people, upon himself.
When he cries out in the darkness, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is actively absorbing the relational abandonment, the exile, the total curse of the Deuteronomic law.
He takes the unmitigated holy wrath of the tearing lion upon himself so that the elect bride doesn't have to.
He pays the dowry to buy back the prostitute with his own blood.
So as we transition to our final thoughts and pastoral application,
Right.
we have to ask, if Christ has satisfied the lawsuit, how do we as the church today experience this restoration?
That's the key pastoral question.
We look at the new covenant, where the law is written on the heart. How does Hosea's vision of the wilderness allurement, God saying in chapter 2, "Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her," how does that beautifully prefigure the way Christ actually sanctifies the church today, as we see in a text like Ephesians 5?
It prefigures it perfectly. In Ephesians 5, Paul tells us that Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to sanctify her, cleansing her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle.
Christ takes us, his historically unfaithful bride, and he actively pulls us away from the noise, the distractions, and the idols of our culture.
He pulls us away from our modern Egypt and Assyria, and he brings us into the quiet wilderness of his grace. He strips away the vocabulary of our idols, taking the names of the bells from our lips, and he replaces it with his own righteousness, justice, and steadfast love.
He is actively washing us, continually speaking tenderly to us through the proclamation of the gospel, ensuring our ultimate presentation at the marriage supper of the Lamb.
That is beautiful, and it brings us to the synthesis of our takeaways. If you are preaching, teaching, or counseling in the local church this week, how do you equip and inspire your people with the Book of Hosea?
First, as we mentioned earlier, we must fundamentally shift how we preach about sin. We must move our congregations from dry behavioral legalism to relational gravity.
When someone in your church struggles with pornography or greed or pride, don't just tell them they broke a rule on a cosmic checklist. Show them they are betraying a faithful, bleeding husband.
Sin is a relational wound. It is spiritual adultery. When we understand the grief of God, repentance becomes about restoring a relationship, not just managing our behavior.
Second, we must actively combat covenantal syncretism.
This is a huge one.
The Northern Kingdom tried to worship Yahweh on the Sabbath and Baal on Monday for a good harvest. They wanted the security of God and the security of the empire.
We have to ask the hard questions. Where are our congregations verbally relying on Christ for their eternal salvation, but simultaneously trusting in political power, financial portfolios, or cultural approval for their actual day-to-day security?
We must identify our modern alliances with Egypt and Assyria and call our people back to exclusive, unshared trust in Yahweh.
Third, this book stands as a stark, terrifying warning for pastoral leadership. Look at the failure of the 8th century priesthood. They rejected the knowledge of God, the Dad Ochim, and God rejected them from being priests.
As leaders, we must prioritize deep, robust biblical literacy and the experiential knowledge of God above everything else.
We cannot substitute administrative efficiency, slick marketing, cultural relevance, or attendance metrics for the faithful, rigorous exposition of the Word. If we do, we are actively participating in a famine of the Word of God in our churches. We are leading our people into exile.
And finally, amidst all the heavy warnings, we must lead our weary people to rest in the doctrine of sovereign election.
Ministry is exhausting. Believers get weary. We fail repeatedly.
We often act like the half-baked loaf or the gullible dove. But our standing before God does not rely on our shifting emotional states or our fluctuating performance. It relies entirely on God's active, unilateral, covenantal faithfulness.
He said, "I will betroth you to me forever in faithfulness." When our urge evaporates like the morning dew, his ease stands like a mountain. He supplies the righteousness we lack.
Amen to that.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you close your Hebrew Bibles and your notes today.
Let's hear it.
In Hosea 14.2, the prophet commands us to return to God and bring the fruit of our lips, words of genuine repentance rather than empty, hypocritical sacrifices. We've spent this time talking about the incredible, scandalous lengths God went to in the 8th century BC.
Right.
Think about this. If God was willing to subject himself to the absolute agony of marrying a chronically unfaithful bride, if he was willing to command his own prophet to endure that public humiliation and trauma just to graphically demonstrate his relentless love to a single rebellious doomed generation, what lengths is he going to right now in the unseen everyday realities of your own life and your own ministry?
That's a profound thought.
How is he working right now, perhaps through trials, perhaps through the stripping away of your comforts to gently allure you back into the wilderness? How is he working to strip away your reliance on your own strength, your own intellect, or your own ministry success, just to speak tenderly to you and remind you that you are deeply, irrevocably his?
That is the enduring, transformative power of the Book of Hosea.
Thank you so much for joining us in this deep dive into the Word. Dive deep into the text, translate faithfully, preach boldly, and rest in the relentless, pursuing love of the husband of the church.